味わったの初めてなんだというふうなことを言ってて、それがなんか10代の少年みたいですごく面白かったんですが。
One thing about the interview that stands out in his mind is you were talking about how fun it is to actually get a band together, which he thought was kind of surprising coming from you, because you sound kind of like a giddy teenager with his first band.
What was the question?
Well, that was just it was an observation. I mean, should we be surprised by that? I guess expects you to be a little more of a loner.
それとね、それだったらなぜもっと早くそういう関係を作ろうとしなかったんでしょう。
And why didn't you take that approach earlier? Why did it take you so long?
But I've had bands from when I was a kid, from when I wasn't in the guitar. But I decided, because I could play instruments myself, I decided that I didn't need to. I could get by without sort of touring. And there was no need to have a band.
No, thanks. Yes, please.
What's the name? No, thanks. I'm going to wire that on copy.
Why don't I? Yeah, that's fine. There was no need to have a band because I didn't tour and I didn't really fancy the idea of touring, so there's no need to have a band because as I do an album every 3 years, it'd be too expensive to keep everybody sort of coming out. No, I am kind of like alone, but in some ways, but the way that I've always envisioned there is it being a thing that works in film, music and books, and that's the kind of area that I want to go, and I just want to get the live band situation consolidated with this tour, so I can then start moving it along the rest. But I've always worked with I've always collaborated with people. It's just a more permanent collaboration.
どう？
ちょっと私。
共同作業はね、昔からやってるんだけども、でしかも10代の時は実際にバンド活動みたいなことをやってたんだけども、まあ一人でやっていけるという自信があったし、しかも3年に一度っていうペースでしか作品を出してなかったんで、ずっとなんていうのかな、バンドをこうツアーに連れていくようなことをやると非常に経済的な負担が大きいと、やってられないだろうと。しかもどうせ一人でできるから、まあバンドやらなくていいだろうというのがあると思って。
でもこんなにやってみて楽しいとね、もっと早くやっとけばよかったなとかそういうことは考えないです。
But now that you're having so much fun leading a band, don't you wish you had done it earlier, or is this a permanent?
No, because I'm really proud to have represented before when it was soul mining and infected, and they wouldn't have been the same. If me and Johnny had formed the band when we first met in 1981, he wouldn't have gone on to do the Smiths, and I wouldn't have done soul mining and infected. And no, I don't regret it. I can appreciate it more now than I could have 5, 6 or something. This is delicious, this stuff. Have you tried this? It's really great.
ジョニーに会った時何だって？
いや、81年に初めて会ったんだけど、その時点でバンドは一緒にできたんだけども、しかしそうすればね、その素晴らしいソロアルバムはできなかったし、そのアルバムはいまだにね、これに持ってるし、ジョニーだったらね、スミスはできなかっただろうし、だから全然悔いがないと。
なるほど。でもその時点でジョニーマンも実際に言ってるんだけども、スミスを結成しなかったらマットと一緒にバンドやってただろうと、昔その81年後にね。であなたとしてはその時にバンド活動をしたいっていうふうにはなんで考えなかったの？
You want to delve a little more specifically into why you didn't form a band with Johnny in 1981? He said he could, you guys actually could have gone on.
Yeah, well, because I lived in London and he lived in Manchester, and practically, no one of us had much money, so on a practical level, it just wasn't practical. It's not now. I mean, now our drummer lives in Los Angeles, Johnny lives in Manchester. I live some of the time in Spain, and the bass player, and some live in Wales. Although we live all over the place, it's more practical now. We can actually afford to fly around and get together. But none of us had any money, so it just wasn't destined for them.
ちょっと話題変えるんですけど、ワールドツアー始まってからもうかなりの日が経ってるんですが、多くのミュージシャンというのはこのワールドツアーっていうのはずっと繰り返していくとね、どんどんその人間性とか創造性を蝕んでいくんだということを言う人が多いんですが、あなたにとってそのワールドツアーをここまで続けてきてどういうふうな視点に今いるんでしょうか？
A lot of times when musicians, bands go on tours of the world, it kind of takes its toll on the members in terms of their personal relationships with each other, and also on the the creative side of the band as well. You haven't found that to be a problem?
No, but I mean, when you say the creative, I didn't intend to write on the tour because it's a completely different thing. When we come off tour with Anthropology and I'm going to start writing, it's a completely different mentality. And I think if you expect to be that creative on tour, then you're going to mislead yourself. I think you've got to realise what it is. You gear everything towards the hour and a half you're on stage, and it's a different kind of mentality. As far as on the personal relationship, we've been very lucky. I mean, we all get on very well anyway. I mean, there are times when I guess you just want to be more on your own, you know, and everybody does that. It's important to maintain your own space and your own identity, because 7 or 8 months being together with a bunch of people, even with your family under the same roof, there's stress and strain. But there's been very little of that, and everybody kind of, as I said, is very close. Also respects each other's privacy. So the only toll it's been is just everyone's physically drained. And now, because we're towards the end of the tour and there's still sort of jet lag coming through now, everyone's very, very tired and drained. So that's the only drain that's
想像性を保っていける理由は？
いや、創造性をまず別に発揮する必要はないっていうかね、そのツアーの時にね、曲を作ろうと思うのがバカなんだっていうかね、終わってからね、書いた方がいいと、何も他の仕事をツアーやりながらやることないと、だからまあ別に創造性が要されることはない、
必要ではないと。
必要ではないと。
僕は主にマット・ジョンソンという人はやっぱり基本的にはソングライティングにこう命かけてるんだと。でそういう作業っていうのは一人で割と孤独にやる作業ですから、それとそのツアーにおけるなんていうのかな、いわゆるロックンロールライフっていうのかな、そういうものっていうのはほとんど正反対だって気がするんですが、実際にそのこういう初めてのワールドツアーでの味わっているその生活形態って楽しいです。
He can only assume certain things about you, and like he assumes, first of all, you're the kind of artist who seems to stake everything on the songwriting. That seems to be the main thing. And he's wondering how is the life on the road? Is this something you can get into, or is it a real pain?
I found it very easy. I've always travelled a lot anyway. I think the important thing is to be disciplined. It gets very tiring, the actual travelling process itself, but also doing a lot of promotion and doing content. It's important to keep yourself disciplined as well as you can. By the food you eat, not drinking too much alcohol, no drugs, and exercise, swimming. I actually sort of meditate as well. I'm very sort of strict. I'm very strict. I have quite a strict discipline with your life anyway. And through sort of meditation to relax, swimming, exercising, getting plenty of sleep. That's the only way. And that in itself, sustains you. But also, unfortunately, it's not possible to see as much of the cities that I'd like because you're in on your own. You don't really get enough time to sort of see the city. I've tried to read a lot. The band, there's a lot of humour in the band, so we sort of have a laugh just taking other bands or each other. So there's a hell of a lot of humour around, which makes it very, it's very positive atmosphere, the band and the crew. There's a lot of good people. I don't find it hard, because like I said, I've travelled for years, and I enjoy travelling. And it's a different mentality. In the studio, I mean, to me the most important thing is writing. I'll let you answer that bit, then we'll go on to the writing.
Okay. Yeah,
these strawberries are delicious, by the way. Thank you. Very nice, very sweet.
会話続けたいんだけど、説明はいるか？
いや、いらない。
It's okay, you can go on. See, often he'll understand what you're saying, or else he'll figure that he doesn't have to understand what you're saying. We'll cover it later, but please continue with your answer.
Okay. To me, the most important thing is songwriting. That is the purest part for me. That is the one time when I'm truly happy. From then, it kind of that's the purest part, because from then, when you go to a studio, you're dealing with other people, whether it's an engineer, say, other musicians. And even though, I mean, like it or not, there is a certain amount of compromise, even if it's subconsciously. As soon as you involve other people in the creative process, they tend to be a kind of, what's a kind of mild compromise. Then taking it on from there, doing the videos, then doing interviews and touring. That is more the work side, that is getting across, that is basically promoting the initial idea. But the initial idea, the songwriting itself, is the thing that I enjoy most. That is what I do. Songwriting, producing, that is really what I do. But I don't find playing live mean, it's getting harder now because we're getting just physically exhausted. But generally I've got found that problem. I mean, I played gigs when I was a kid at about 11, and I didn't pursue it, I didn't play very often because I didn't particularly like it, but now I'm enjoying it, having a good band together made it easier. And I'm enjoying the sensation. Because you get an immediate response. Everything is in the studio, you're working in a vacuum, you're writing something, and I can spend up to a year on an album, or 18 months writing and recording an album, and everything's under the microscope, and you're sort of straining and you're focusing the whole time, and there's no real, there is the gratification in that you're creating something, but you haven't got that feedback that you have. For instance, on tour, you get a certain thing about a show and you get a certain feedback and then move on. It's a very instantaneous thing. You psych yourself up for a gig, then there's a release, and there's a relaxation afterwards. In the studio, it's constantly being wound tighter and tighter and tighter. So it's a completely different process, a completely different satisfaction. Certainly enjoy touring and filming, and but writing is the most important thing.
時々ホテルの窓からテレビ投げたくなったりします。そういうことはないと。
You never feel like throwing TVs out of hotel room.
I did that when I was about 19 in New York, and when I got the bill for it, I never did it again. So I got out of this system.
ツアーやってるとね、パフォーマーとしてどんどん成長すると思うんですよね。で、そういうことっていうのは、そのソングライターである自分とか、あるいはミュージシャンとしての自分、そういうところに、ダイレクトにつながってくる成長としてあるんでしょうか。
It's safe to assume that touring matures the performer. How about your development as a whole, though? Do you think it has helped you develop?
Yeah, I think every experience is good. I don't think there's an experience which is ultimately bad, because you just learn from it and you kind of it goes into a sort of grand sort of stock experience that you have. Certainly learned a lot about my voice. It strengthened my voice. But once you come off tour for about a month, everything settles down again, but it certainly strengthened my voice. Made me more aware. I mean, the first time I've done it 7 to 8 concerts, and more I've done more concerts in the last 6 months than I've done in the rest of my life. So you become more aware generally of what things work live, what things don't work live. A greater awareness of the strengths of the musicians that you're working with. It's good for a kind of confidence and nerves. I mean, I wasn't particularly that nervous at all, actually. Considering I was the least experienced, and there was more pressure on me because I was quite lucky. But that's quite good. But on another level, observing kind of audiences on the other. The audiences in Japan, I've never thought I've come across before, except when they're very quiet, and that takes getting used to, and that's quite strange for us. You're talking about audiences generally, there is this kind of rock vocabulary that's been developed over the past 5 years, which I don't really like very much in American situation. And people expect you to say certain things like, hey, you're paying to do it, or everybody do this, do that, and clap your hands. It's like Pavlovian calling response what people do. And it starts to sort of mimic the singer. And I don't really like that. I think that you then can start to sort of patronise the audience by sort of singing up en masse and then getting them to do certain things. I'm kind of against that in a way. I think that the kind of stuff we do is more to be listened to. But having said that, it's very strange when you come up against audiences just listening to complete silence. Like on stage last night, some of the band had played it before. David, the drummer, has worked through a lot with Sakamoto and made it all. He spent a lot of time there. James had taught him Julian Cope, and Melanie was singing with Duran Duran, but the other three, the first time on stage, it almost like felt like being in a dream because it was like the roadie bring on my guitar, you could hear a pin drop and you'd go, Christ, weird. The only thing that would have made it weird is if we hadn't have had any clothes on stage. It was bizarre. But no, yeah, the monitoring was really bad last night. My monitors were terrible because I don't think there was a lot of drapes. It's very, very dry, the sound. I couldn't hear the band very well. My voice, the EQ in my voice was so peculiar. It was very dry and very exposed. And I was sounding like Neil Diamond or something. It was horrible, and it was like freaking me out. I couldn't concentrate properly. So it's very, it's a new experience playing here, and I mean, they warned us in advance. They said, look, it's going to be completely different, you know, and it's the audience are a bit more respectful, and they're listening. But it was like, literally, you could hear a pin drop. It freaked me out.
So you didn't feel like saying at that point, so how you all doing today?
No, I did say a couple of things in Japanese. I can't remember I can't remember.
I think you said something like stand up.
No, that wasn't me. I got the guy and sort of production manager to do that, which we do that a lot of gigs just to get everyone. No, it was strange. But you get sort of people sort of staring at you intensely, just like, but with no expression. They can see something I can't see, and it's very odd. It wasn't an unpleasant experience. It was just weird. It was like, because we were jet lagged as well, and the sound on stage was very strange and very dry and very quiet. It was almost like everything was going in slow motion, and the audience was silent. It was like a dream of a gig.
How are you going to deal with that tonight, though?
I have to do exactly the same thing. There's nothing I can do. I don't know what to do. I mean, I know now, so I won't be as a shock. You know, it was just a real shock to the system after we'd just come from LA. The LA audiences aren't that vociferous anyway, but they were for us, and it was an unusual gig in LA because they were more lively than usual. LA gigs are usually, they usually check you out, but it wasn't unpleasant, it was strange. In fact, I was more freaked out by the mullet by Senator Neil Diamond than I was about Neil Diamond, which was a horrible experience.
それであれなんだ、昨日開演前に多分これマットのあれだと思うんだけど、
Is there any more of that raw stuff?
マネージャーが時々それやって。
あ、そうなの？
いろんな国で。
特に一向に考え出した対策じゃなかったの？あれマージャンの声なの？
So the thing about the please stand up, the announcement was your manager.
Tour manager.
Tour manager, yeah. He sometimes does this.
Yeah, he does that.
That wasn't just especially for the Japanese.
It was said in Japanese, especially for the Japanese.
We got it, but you've done it in other countries in other languages too.
それで昨日はなんかビートジェネレーションとかそういうシングルをね、ほとんどやんなかったんですけど、あれはどうしてやったんでしょうか？
まあいろんなシングルを出したってこと。
そうそうそう。
I was going to say, why did we play it?
Yeah, how can you left out to the important single?
I'm sick of that song. We did used to play that, but I just got bored with it. And the thing is, I don't think they did very well in Japan particularly, and I don't view them as that you should necessarily play the singles. I just see what songs that they're not playing, and Perfect and Beaten Generation I think are the main two that have met it. A lot of other album tracks. Just bored with it. Really?
じゃあちょっと話変えて最新作のマインドボム、これはあなたの曲作りとかレコーディングの方法っていうのはほとんど変わってなくて変化しなかったんですが、今後そのバンドの中でこうバンド活動をしていく上でね、将来的に、やり方っていうのは抜本的に変わる可能性もありますでしょうか？ノーサンキュー。
The album Mind Bomb, he notes that it reveals pretty much the same approach on your part in terms of songwriting and recording. Do you think that working within a band type framework is going to change your approach to recording or songwriting in the future?
Yeah, and not necessarily to songwriting. I mean, there's a case of like throwing the baby out with the bathwater. The reason these musicians joined is because they like the way that I wrote, the way that I work, which is unlike any other band, I think. I mean, my system of work is something I've developed, over sort of 10 years. So I'm certainly not going to change that. What I'm going to do is look at the strengths of the individual members and work out how to integrate that into the system that I already have. I think it will give us a greater breadth of vision in a sense. Johnny on one side. It's got some qualities to add which weren't there before. But as far as I know how I want to approach the next album, I do want to utilise the band. I want to take advantage of the fact that they are brilliant musicians and get a more live feel. My main criticism of my previous work is that it's maybe been a bit sort of sterilised. I tend to possibly make it too clean. I want it to be rough around the edges. I want it to be more capture the spirit rather than worry too much about production techniques, which is a big criticism of mine of a lot of contemporary music, where it tends to concentrate so much on the sound of the thing and the production that it loses the heart and the spirit.
いいですわ。今回はね、そのバンドという形を前面に出して、しかもそのジャケットはマットのアップの顔がドーンと映ってたのね。で、そういうことからやっぱこれまでになくマット・ジョンソン自身が ポップスターとして見られてる側面、ポップスターとしての知名度が今回一気に上がったと思うわけで、そういう状態というのは好ましいですか？
Seems like this time around we're seeing, it was like the close-up of you on the record jacket. We're kind of seeing you as well, you're being portrayed more as a pop star this time around.
No, I disagree. I didn't think I looked particularly like a pop star on the album sleeve. I looked like a horrible girl. Actually, I regret having a picture on the sleeve because I don't like getting recognised. And the reason I did that, it was my decision. And the notion that I'm being portrayed kind of suggests that the record company is somehow influencing things, which they don't. I mean, I basically have final say in everything. It's because my brother does the paintings. He didn't want to do the paintings for the sleeve. He wanted time off. So I didn't want to use another painter. I decided to use a photograph. But having done that, I regret it because then I get sort of people sort of recognise me. And I don't actually like that because then you get too sort of self-conscious and into the thing. But it's not at all sort of, I mean, the kind of ideas I'm expressing are things which no other way popular music is doing. My ideas about sort of religion, kind of metaphysical ideas, are ideas which are almost too big to fit into popular music format. Which is why I want to expand it to sort of film and books and something like that in collaborations with different people. But no, I think that's wrong.
I don't quite understand why you think that you don't look like a pop star.
Why do I think I don't?
Yeah.
Well, I don't think I do. I mean, my idea of a sort of pop star is kind of like a glamorous kind of, I just think I'm a pretty regular guy, and the band are pretty regular guys, so we certainly don't. It also suggests some attempt to sort of procure a young audience, whatever. But I mean, I think, I just think in terms of the music, not in terms of the way that something looks, really. I think it was, it's a pretty sort of strong picture to have on it. I didn't want to use another painter, so I used a photograph. But I don't see that as being, sort of a guy, kiddies program, stuff like that, and the subject matter I'm dealing with, I think, I'm certainly not trying to pander to any audience. I'm just following my own kind of impulses and instincts without any regard for commercialism.
俺言いたかったのはさ、彼がポップスターになりたいとしてジャケットをその自分の顔を使ったんじゃなくて、そういう効果によってね、今回その知らない人もマット・ジョンソンっていうのは一体誰なのか、顔をよく分かるという状況が出てきて、例えばその道歩いてるマット・ジョンソンを見て、マット・ジョンソンだっていうふうな状況が多分その自分の望んでないところでも出てきてると思うんですよね。
そのようなこと言われてたの。そういうところを後悔してる。だからというと、顔を上がってほしくないと。だから逆効果がある。
で例えばそのいきなり道歩いてサインしてくれるみたいな、そういうのって迷惑でしょうがないっていうか。そう。そういうのは本当嫌いなんです。
This is an overlap with what you were saying, but what he was referring to in the original question was, exposing your face like that kind of makes you more identifiable as a musician.
That's all right. How you doing?
It makes you more identifiable as a musician, which for you is probably something that's not that good because you're going to have people recognizing you intruding on privacy.
Yeah. I mean, the thing is, I did the full-length video before and I'm doing a tour. And you come to a point where, you have to be recognised for a certain way. But one point I guess I'm trying to make is that instead of trying to sell myself as a personality, I've always tried to sort of put across new ideas. I guess people like Madonna or George Michael, I don't particularly like naming names, but I don't think they've got much ground to complain when they do have invasions of their privacy because they're basically marketing themselves. Madonna has this kind of sex public or whatever. She sold herself, but I've always expressed my ideas and kind of hidden beyond the thing of the payments and everything else. But there comes a point where I am, after all, operating in a kind of industry which part of the kind of machinery is that it sells personality and stuff like that. And I've always emphasised the lyrical side and the ideas I express. And it's difficult at the end of the day if you take it to its logical extreme or conclusion. If you don't want to be recognised, then you just make a set for yourself and just sit in a room doing it for your own pleasure. I mean, I do want to get my ideas across to an audience, but without always putting emphasis on the work rather than the personality of the audience.
ところでその現在のね商業的な成功というものをどういうふうに捉えているのか、聞きたいんですけど、まだまだこんなもんでは影響力はもっと世の中に及ぼせないと思っているか、それとも これ以上を望んでしまうのっていうのは逆にその無理しなきゃダメだという形で捉えているかどうでしょうか。
What is about your perceptions about your commercial success now? Do you think being compelled to reach a larger audience is going to mean making compromises?
Yeah, but that's why I don't have a particularly large audience. Because I decided a long time ago I wasn't going to do that. If the to get as big as U2, we'd have to sell to little girls and old grannies. That's why we have a pretty small audience. But we don't sell. We're not a huge band. We're like massive cult band, but it's about 1 million albums we sell, and that's just, we can't say I personally can't say we'll take it beyond that, because I won't dilute the ideas, and that has become a problem. In America and Canada, there's like stickers on the album that say under 21s can't buy it, and the video thing I did in Britain, it was like an 18 release, people under 18 and stuff like that. So I made that decision when I was about 17 that I was going to stick to the gun. And having said that, I mean, some of the most influential bands in contemporary music history, but like the Velvet Underground or whatever, never had big audiences, but they were very influential, and their records sold over a period of time. And my first albums are still selling now, as well as mind-boggling, and it kind of proved my point. I made up my mind a long time ago that I couldn't do that. I mean, some people are good at doing that, and some people aren't, but that is the answer.
あなたは物書きとしてもね大成したんじゃないかと思うんですけど、しかしやっぱりどうしても音楽じゃなきゃダメだったんだというそういう理由というのはあるでしょうか。
Seems like you would have been a brilliant writer also, writer of verse.
Oh, really? Essays?
Yeah, essay. Why is it you stuck to music?
Well, simply, I was completely uneducated at school. I was working by the time I was 15, and I failed every exam and it was just like dancing school. If you come from a fairly working class background in London, and you haven't got any qualifications, you've got a few choices open to you. You either get into pop music, football maybe, or work at McDonald's. And that's about it. So the most appealing one, not being a particularly good footballer, I like football, I wasn't that good at it, was pop music. And it's a fairly easy thing to get into. It's only as I've got older, I've travelled a lot and I've read a lot and I've kind of developed my own philosophies based on my personal experience. So I've started to try to put my ideas into this format. Because I like music, I've always loved music, all forms, whether it's blues or classical or whatever. And I think it's a very relevant form of communication and a relevant art form actually. I think that music is a thing of beauty, and it depends upon the motive behind it, which obviously determines how you see it. So I've just reached this stage. I'm actually intending to make a film, not for the next album, but the one after that. I'm trying to raise finance for a film, not like the Infected film, but a kind of more advanced for that. The last film I did was a kind of prototype. And also I want to sort of publish some books, not only my own stuff, but different people that I'm actually thinking of collaborating with. Not fiction, but this sort of contemporary philosophical stuff. There's this guy that I'm in contact with at the moment. It's like a latter-day metaphysical Thomas Paine or what. But his ideas are really revolutionary, and I want to get those things across. But the thing is, lack of education is the short answer to that. And when you're younger, you're very hung up about lack of education. As soon as you get older, you realise that the educational system is a bit of a joke anyway. That it's basically ideas that count rather than technique. Technique can be learned, but to sort of develop ideas, that's not, it's not something that can be taught by someone.
あなた普段どういう音楽を聴いてるかって僕非常に興味があるんですけど、リラックスしてうちにいる時とかどういう音楽を聴いてますか？
He's extremely interested in finding out what you listen to during your spare hours when you're relaxing at home.
Okay, well I'll tell you what I brought on tour if you want to. Recently I've been listening to a lot of classical music. I like blues a lot, John Lee Hooker, Howling Wolf, Muddy Waters. A lot of like Colombian music and Brazilian music. Ska music and bluegrass, the early stuff from like the 60s. Also classical, Mahler, Mozart, Ravel, Debussy, Beethoven, Elgar. I've been listening to tons of that. That's pretty much all I've been listening to actually. I think as you get out, when you're younger, I mean, you listen to classical music and it doesn't really satisfy, well, it doesn't even do it, it kind of goes above your head. You kind of prefer stuff which is more bass, I guess. But the older you get, if your life is kind of touched by deeper sort of experiences or tragedy or whatever, you find that the only thing you can get satisfaction from is kind of higher forms of art, whether it's music or film or literature, stuff that kind of satisfies your soul. I tend to find that I don't really watch television or listen to contemporary music because I just find it has a depressive quality. I like stuff which is inspired by a higher motive drive. And some Mozart stuff like Requiem. I find kind of just satisfies me when other stuff can't. I like to listen to film soundtracks as well. Nino Rota, he did a lot of the Bellini films. It was what's his face that did spaghetti western. Ennio Morricone.
Yeah, right.
Well, Ennio Morricone liked him as well, but Nino Rota was absolutely brilliant, and or John Barry. But film soundtrack stuff as well. So very wide breadth. I also like a lot of the. I don't know too much about it, but a lot of like the hip hop stuff, like Public Enemy or KRS-One. Very hardcore political. I'm dubious about some of their sort of sentiments, they're sort of sexist or whatever, and a bit racist, but the fact that they get more sort of politicised. And some of the best lyrics I think are coming out from like the blacks in America. There's no sort of contemporary white music really that I listen to or like a lot.
この人はね、曲を作るときに瞑想したり断食したりして結構そういうハードな環境で作る人なんですよ。そうするとね、例えば自分がすごくハッピーなことがわわやってたりするときにふとこう、自分がそういう環境で作った曲というのは暗いなとか思ったりすることってないんでしょうか。
He's of the understanding that you tend to kind of push yourself when you're writing material, like you fast and you meditate and stuff like that. He wants to know that when you're with like your bandmates and your friends enjoying yourself, do you ever kind of think back on your own music and say, Jesus Christ, why do I push myself to these limits, or why do I make music that might be perceived as sort of a downer?
But yeah, that's the problem. It's perceived as a downer, but I'm actually, if people scratch beneath the surface, they find out it's not, and I'm actually very optimistic. No, I mean my earlier albums were fueled by chemicals and alcohol, and frankly, I didn't want to end up like one of these guys about 45. That says, oh, I've learned now, that stuff's bad for you, I'm now going to sort of clean up while they're burnt out, and they are burnt out. They're like the Claptons and the Rolling Stones and people like that got artistically barren because they just burnt themselves out and they've probably not cleaned up anyway. But I wanted to kind of achieve the same kind of intensity that I used to have through taking sort of speed and vodka or whatever when I would write. I didn't want to lose the intensity, but I wanted to get it through natural means and achieve happiness. I mean, certainly sort of drugs and chemicals disturb your personality, no doubt about that. And I just wanted to, basically, I just, like everybody, looking for a deeper, a higher meaning, a higher truth, and a deeper happiness to life. And certainly I'm not unhappy, I'm happy doing it. I'm happy the way that I work. It's not like a torture to me, like this stupid sort of perception that you have to put up with this sort of tortured eyes. Well, I'm happy like that. I'm very intense about the work, and I push myself. To other people, they couldn't do it. They couldn't push themselves as hard as me because they're not as passionate about what they do. But for me, it's like naturally, it's just a deep kind of compulsion to do that. And I enjoy myself. I'm very sort of happy person. I'm not a depressing.
What about the perception of it as a downer that you sort of dismissed at the beginning of the answer?
That is a problem in a way but it's labels. You see, journalists tend to be very lazy, and you tend to find you may have done an interview years ago and somebody may say something and a label stick, and all you do, and journalists get press packages and then they read it through and make a kind of based opinion upon that rather than either you meeting you in person or really judging your work from a fresh perspective. And it's easy to do that, categorisation, we stuff in this stuff. And the thing is as well, because I deal with bigger issues, like God, love, death, war, these kind of things. And I don't sing about sort of cars or, I don't know, whatever, and banal kind of love songs. Then people, at the end of the day, if you put someone in a room long enough on their own, their mind will naturally, their consciousness will gravitate towards the bigger kind of issues. Because you can't hide from them. We're here for a purpose on Earth. And it's not just to sort of gratify your senses. I mean, there is, I do believe that you should try to sort of pursue and achieve happiness and everything else. But everyone has a purpose. And you can distract yourself for so long, stick your head in the sand, I've just attempted to sort of face up to things and express my ideas about this. And most of the audience, I guess it's people that are not really into my stuff that see this being down, but anyone that's sort of into it kind of like finds it more sort of, it's often like you read a book that you feel great empathy with, and it kind of gives you a sense of recognition. I would have found that reading books that, you may think are a sort of heavyweight subject. But what I find depressing is contemporary music, trivial things I find really depressing. I only like things which sort of challenge your mind. It's enjoyable, and I just don't like that trivial thing. Because I certainly don't think, right, let's make an album that deals with this. It's not a contrived thing. It's just the way that the kind of stuff I read and the way that I think every day. And I just so happen to choose this music, and that's why I'm a bit of a fish out of water, because most songwriters choose not to do that because they don't think like that. They maybe just think about, they just don't think about the same subject.
じゃあ最後の質問なんですけど、彼はその神という単語を結構詩の中に頻繁に使っているんですね。で、今そういう神という言葉を非常にシリアスに、否定であれ肯定であれね、シリアスに使えるミュージシャンというのはほとんどマット・ジョンソンだけではないかという気が私はするんです。で、そういうふうに、他に全くいないという状況と自分がなぜそういう言葉をシリアスに言わねばならないのかという点について教えてほしい。
One last question here. And this could overlap what you were just saying there, but you seem to be one of the few, if not the only, artist in your particular situation who uses the subject of God quite a bit in the lyrics. Why do you feel so compelled to do it?
I never had a religious upbringing at all, fortunately. I think that people have made the mistake I'm against institutionalised religion quite sort of passionately, actually, because it's done more damage to Christianity. I think there's more bloodshed over Christianity than there was over Nazi throughout history. And it's based on lies. A lot of it's fairy stories and everything else. I've sort of done quite a bit of research in this history of Christianity, and a lot of it's made up. Like the Council of Nicaea, when they sort of decided to form Christianity, it was written hundreds of years after Christ died. You can't even believe what you read in tomorrow's newspapers about events today. So I don't see how you can believe a bunch of ignorant priests that long ago that wrote stories about a guy that died 300, 400 years before they were born. Because it was at the Council of Trent in 1523 that the hierarchy of the Christianity had a vote as to whether women had souls or not. And they decided that they did, but only by 3 votes. So if they're that stupid, then I can't see how you can actually claim it. But I think the problem in late 20th century, particularly Western societies, is that by people are rejecting a lot of the conventional religions. But unfortunately, they're rejecting God as well. They're not replacing it with anything else. I believe in a kind of natural philosophy, a development of the intuition and the conscience. And I think there is an inherent morality and goodness within people. But I think it has to be cultivated from within rather than imposed from above, which is the way that religion kind of does things. And unfortunately, religion has sought to terrorise and enslave the spirit of humanity rather than liberate it. I think that religion runs counter to God and life, which is basically continuing sort of expansion and evolution. That is the nature of life and of God himself. And religion tries to sort of tether people's minds to kind of books that were written thousands of years ago, which may have been relevant then, if you can believe it, but certainly not relevant now. I think the problem that people make is that when people say God, they think of like cranks and religions and death and everything else. But to me, sort of God is everything good in life. And see, we exist then really sort of just in a 3-dimensional reality. And it's difficult for me to get often ideas across because it's like trying to explain to someone what an acid trip is like. And if you try to say to someone that space and time is an illusion, someone that's never sort of taken hallucinogenics, they're like, what are you talking about? But you've actually taken it and you've seen time has actually stopped and a room has suddenly got huge and all these incredible thoughts. Basically your nervous system becomes dilated. And I believe that our nervous systems, the way that they're designed to keep reality out rather than let reality in. Our 5 senses are more like prison bars. sense. And it's difficult for me to get these ideas across because they're personal ideas, they're based on personal experience, and they're just my beliefs. I certainly don't want to impose them upon people, they're just a view from where I see it. The notion of sort of God, I mean, whether you're talking about, so I think the essence of all religions are the same in all major philosophies. This kind of, you know, as ye sow, so shall ye reap, the law of karma. Even though that, it wasn't said by Jesus, I think it was nicked from Confucius, so he got it somewhere else anyway. So all these, they're just universal truths, really, that are maybe the core of all religions. All religions were kind of, I mean, none of these people, these religions were sort of, the people that founded these religions didn't want to found religions, they were basically the people around them that maybe had less enlightened minds that invented the religions, and they were kind of taken over by vested interest. And I guess if there's anything I'm trying to sort of say from the work is for people to not listen to anything apart from their own intuition, their own conscience, and try to sort of experience. I think, you know, the notion of God, or does God exist? I think it's a bit of a ridiculous question to even ask, actually, because God just is, whether we like it or not. They're sort of not minuscule, sort of finite creatures. Although I think there is a part of us that transcends three-dimensional world, and that basically there's a part of us which is bigger, the higher self, and we, I think the human spirit is eternal, and we incarnate into physical matter for short periods of time to learn certain lessons. We're here for a purpose, and we can try and distract ourselves for as long as we want, whether through drink, drugs, junk, media, or whatever, but there's a part of you that is nagging, that's yearning for something beyond the pure sort of three-dimensional materialism. I'll just finish off. And that's the part that I'm trying to touch in people through my work, I guess. It's that there's a part of us that sort of transcends the rational mind, because also it's just, you know, rationality, the way that we deal with language, everything is reductionism, we reduce everything. And I'm trying to work out ways to sort of express things beyond that, transcends the language problem. Now, it's difficult because, like I said before, being a bit of a fish out of water, and this is the most mainstream thing I've ever done, doing like a rock tour in a way, and I'm finding that a bit restricted, but I'm seeing it as a means to an end. As I said, I want to expand into like the film ideas and, you know, some books and everything. Because it's a perfect, you know, I have access to literally millions of people. I do sort of radio stations all over the world, radio interviews, TV interviews, press, as well as the concerts and the records, and actually have access to sort of millions of people. I'd like to sort of put over some positive ideas. There's too many negative people in the world. There's too much fear and terror, and just put over some positive ideas and align myself with sort of positive people, and try to sort of pursue and find out universal truths. And my attitude towards politics, it's always like Beating Generation or whatever, kind of like mildly political, but I'm kind of bored of politics, because to me politicians are nothing but businessmen or business people that manoeuvre themselves in their positions of power through deceit, whether it's Bush or Thatcher or whoever you've got over here. And the people that I'm finding very more inspirational are the natural leaders of humanity, whether it's the Martin Luther Kings or the Gandhis or the Nelson Mandelas. They're people that are expressing something, again, which almost transcends critical faculties and communicates with people's souls, because there's a deep truth in what they're saying, and they are the natural leaders of humanity. People like that are expressing something so pure and big, and people respond to that, and their message lives on. But unfortunately, the leaders of our society they're just narrow-minded, materialistically minded people. But I think we're on the verge of an evolution in consciousness. And if you was to say 5 years ago, predict the events that were going to happen in Eastern Europe and South Africa, and in the green and environmental kind of movement, people would have called you sort of a hopeless idealist and naive. But now, it's almost like anything can happen. I'm really excited about the future, and I think that the problem is with Western society, we have a kind of a political freedom in Britain, in America, but there's no real philosophical freedom, because you can only judge your opinions on what you're given, and we're very restricted. In Britain there's a thing called the blasphemy laws, which prevent criticism of Christianity. Now, I don't want to attack people's faith, I just think that people should have all the facts that are available before them and make their own mind up. what's good for me isn't necessarily good for anybody else. But what I care about is that people should be able to have philosophical freedom and political freedom and true democratic socialism. The two extremes. When I was in America, I went to the Lincoln Memorial rather, and read the words on the wall. And I just thought, wow, what a wonderful idea for a country. The American Constitution is fantastic. It's all gone horribly wrong, somewhere along the line. And those ideals were brilliant, but countries then rest on their laurels. And the original ideas of Marx and the American Constitution, true democratic socialism, is what I think the countries of the world should be kind of. There's not enough idealists or visionaries. Everyone's too content. America, sat on its arse, could always point its finger at the Soviet bloc and say, look how lucky you are, compare yourself to them. But now I think what it could be exciting. I think America has to really start to think in terms of, it's such an incredible country, America. There's so many things going wrong there, but geographically, environmentally, it's the most beautiful country in the world. But I think it's just got to really start to breathe. I think the future of the American continent, it could be really exciting if there were some sort of visionary people in the United States that wanted to develop genuine sort of positive relationships with South and Central America instead of trying to bully them. Actually, just trying to really bring. It could be the most beautiful. It's the most beautiful, I think, varied continent in the world. And I'm sure that you are going to get some people appearing. I don't know where they're going to come from in America. There doesn't seem to be anybody anywhere in a sort of political life that has any vision, and it's all this very sort of narrow-minded. I mean, there's only one party. You've got two wings of it, the Democrats and the Republicans, but there's no real philosophical freedom in America. Anyone with any idea, and even Lincoln, if he was to turn up today, it'd probably be the way that he looks and his ideas about democratic socialism. I've been carted off as a communist and thrown away. It's just grown so far away from what it originally stood for. But I just think that change is very slow, and it's going to take some kind of some visionaries and just like that. And I think that the country just is evolving. The most unlikely people now are starting to really take care about the environment and starting to maybe think about themselves. Unfortunately, it often takes kind of crises, either in people's lives or in the world as a whole, to act as a catalyst to make people think. But now we seem to be getting some positive events without, often at times of war, then people start to take stock, but we're starting to get some good events happening without that. But as far as getting across ideas like this in sort of popular music, it kind of, the nature of the kind of industry kind of cheapens everything in a way, because you're reduced to, I don't know how much longer I'm going to stay doing music anyway. I'd always do music, but actually, I don't know. I want to see how I can sort of evolve it, and it may end up becoming smaller and smaller, because I may start to alienate the audience completely, which is not something that bothers me, because I think you've got to stay true to yourself. You cannot worry about having a big audience. If I do get a big audience, so we do as a touring band, that's fine, but I'm certainly not going to lose sleep if we sell less and less records. But I'm kind of pursuing my own ideas, and that's fine. I would rather kind of have a smaller audience that was sort of very into what I was doing and responsive, than a huge audience that would buy my records purely because they were fashion. And I've been lucky that my audience has grown through word of mouth. It's been a very slow thing over the last 10 years, but it's been a very gradual. It's built on kind of quite positive foundation, which I'm pleased about. It's been very hard work, and it's been pretty heartbreaking, but kind of trying at times when you don't seem to be making any progress. And I've seen bands come and go, hundreds of them become massive, but then they disappear, and I'm actually plodding, slowly kind of gradually getting more, selling more, but very, very slow. And people that I know that I've met, like kids and everything, they form bands and they all of a sudden they're number one, and they're gigantic, but they can't handle it. I think it's important to have a very slow kind of acclimatisation process so that you feel comfortable. And at the moment I feel very comfortable with the degree of success that I've got in the lifestyle and the way that I can actually communicate with the media and handle the affairs. And I've been working in the music industry since I was about 15. I actually know the ropes of the business more than a lot of people at my record company, because I've been there a lot longer than they have. So from that point of view, it's built on solid foundations, and it's harder work, but it is more satisfying. And I think it's a long-term thing. Whether I don't say how it's going to evolve, whether it's going to evolve into getting involved in film or sort of like essay work or whatever. But I certainly didn't think of myself as being retired when I was 25. I want to still be doing what I'm doing. I look at sort of people like film directors. I often look at people from other spheres of music. I find more inspiration from them than I do from people in music. People like directors like John Huston, that working up till he died. But that kind of the passion for your work is something that I've ever always had to be, and I don't see why that should change. I think if you start worrying about commercialism and heavy rotation, shifting units, then you're getting into sort of areas you shouldn't be worrying about. You should just worry about your work, and as long as I've got enough to eat and sort of do what I want to do, that's all I care about. You know, it's just greed otherwise. I'm very sort of grateful for the lifestyle that I've got. And, you know, I travel, I see a lot of the world, and I've got a lot of good friends and work with a lot of good people. And I'm very lucky, you know. And I think to want too much, it just gets greedy. And once you start getting greedy, you're just going to get disappointed because it's an illusion. Materialism is an illusion. You get it and you're like, you know, because I was like, you know, I earned quite a bit money by the time I was in the early 20s and suddenly realised, there has to be a deeper kind of meaning. You have to be driven by a deeper sense of purpose and a deeper motive than purely wanting new cars and stuff like that. I'm not saying that I'm anti that, you know, I enjoy the you know, a lot of things that money can buy, but not in themselves. They're sort of nice things to add on to the life, but not to base your life upon them. And on that note,
So tell me now, why do you use God as this?
because I believe in God. I do believe in God, but I don't believe in the devil, and I don't believe in religions, but I do believe in God. There you go. That's all you wanted to know. That's just a question. I do waffle on a bit.
It was good. It was good. It was about the longest actually.
I've been doing a lot of press conferences in America on the tour. Like me and the band would sit there, we'd have about 4 other people, and that'd be the thing. And some of my sentences will be 15 minutes long, and the band because they just go off on a tangent.
I think we can fill the 8 pages for you.
That's good. Thank you very much. Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot.
Good luck tonight. Huh?
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I'll tell you what, I'm getting very spaced out with this jet lag. The keyboard player, he fainted last night. On one side, he put his finger on the note, and his finger was holding him up.
Oh, wow.
Jesus. The first get to you. Wow. Because also, the thing being on tour, if you have a couple of days off, it's like 6 months fatigue, something that comes down.
Oh, yeah.
If you keep moving, you can kind of keep it up. But as soon as you relax, it's like, the core of your being is deeply fatigued, and you just got to kind of shake it off. And try to get into drugs and everything. I can see why, but you know, we're determined to sort of try and stay healthy, and we wouldn't be, we would have been killed over a month ago if we got to too much drugs.
こうやってザザのメンバーとしてインタビュー受けるっていうのはどうなんですか？
日本で。
世界中で。
Have you ever been interviewed as a member of Zaza before?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. In excuse me. In America and Australia. Well, on various points on the tour. Right. Yeah.
だけど大体インタビューの数が非常に少ないんで非常に貴重だと思っております。
Well, he has kind of high expectations of an interview because you're not known to give very many interviews on the whole.
Right. Yeah. Well,
Put you on the spot.
Okay. I'll try. Okay.
The tape is running.
最初の質問はあなたはそのスミスを解散後ね、とにかくその脅迫観念に近いものを取りつかれない限りバンドっていうのはやれないんだという非常にその名言を書いてるんですよ。で、僕もそれ名言だなと思ったんだけど、やっぱりそのザザにはね、やっぱりスミスを解散してから非常にその多くのセッションをやったけれども、そういうセッション的な活動とは全然違うものを、そういう脅迫観念的なものを感じてたんでしょうか。
脅迫観念はそれがないとなかなかバンドでやっていけない。
そうそう、バンドでやるためにはそういう脅迫観念に取りつかれないとバンドっていうのはやれないんだと。やっぱザザにはそういうものを感じたんです。
You once said that you had to like you almost had to feel like threatened. I'm not quite sure how to translate this, but you have to feel threatened in order to be in a band. I'm not quite sure what exactly you meant. So, 管理に取り
絶対にこのバンドとこの仲間じゃなきゃもう俺はダメだと。
Obsessed. Yeah, you have to be obsessed with the band.
Obsessed, yeah.
You have to be obsessed with the band in order to be a member. He was very impressed by that statement.
Oh, yeah.
Probably, I guess after the Smiths disbanded, you did a lot of session work
That's
with
right.
various people.
So he's asking me to qualify this, right?
Yeah, well, we're seeing what's the story with the there right now. Are you obsessed with the band?
Yes, I am. That's why I'm on tour. And it was after the Smiths disbanded, I kind of got disillusioned with the idea of that obsession and its existence. Really, I thought that it'd probably be a one-off because it was something that I felt from being a kid. Really, like trying to form bands. I always took the groups I was in very seriously, even though we just probably couldn't play. I was very serious about the music because it was pretty much the only thing I had in my life, really. And the Smiths was the only time where everything clicked, and it was the first time, and we were successful. So at the end of that period, when we split, to be honest with you, I didn't want the responsibility of that obsession anymore. I thought it was far too difficult, and I didn't want the intensity was just too much for me, because I have to be very, very close with the group members, and I did take it so seriously. Anyway, the thing is, I did want to carry on making records and playing guitar, and I was fortunate enough to be approached by people that I had a lot of respect for. Plenty of people I turned down as well, but so I was very lucky, and really quite plainly I just decided to be a session player, because I really at that point really actually felt quite fortunate to be in that position, rather than just turn me back on making records. And I really didn't want the responsibility of having to form another group and get that close to the members and be sort of disappointed and sort of go through all the sort of emotions that I do when I'm in a group. And I just thought, right, that's it, I'm going to do sessions. And then when Matt and I first got together, it was very obvious from the first night. We had a very, very serious and long discussion that it was probably going to work out. And then we made a few tracks, and then I thought, well, here I go again, because it was really obvious that it was starting to work out, and it's something I feel very, very good about. Also, I'm a little bit older now, and I do take it seriously, but I take it less seriously. I tend not to get so uptight about it. So I am obsessed about it. It was almost like, oh God, here I go again. But the point is really, while I'm young and my brain can take it, I feel really, really fortunate to be in that kind of situation. So it feels quite like home to me.
What would be the specific difference between the way you handle it with the Smiths and the way you handle it? The way you handle it now, say you're older now and you're handling it better.
Well, because I really, really want to do it now. Because I was in a position where I didn't have to. At the end of the Smiths, I could have just carried on being a session player or not played at all. And the main thing was one of the things when I left the Smiths, which was a massive matter of principle to me, and I had to accept the very, very, very worst kind of scenario in order for me to leave it, and that was like to go back to Manchester and sit under a tree if I had to, no money, and go back to obscurity, and that was really, really quite attractive. And as I say, I sort of faced that. I thought, right, well, that's better than the way I feel at the moment, and I did that. And then I did a few sessions and sat around for a year, and then thought about it, and then realised that I want to do it, and it's a position that I choose to be in. And towards the end of the Smiths, it was like, I just didn't really want to be in that position. It was getting very, very claustrophobic, and because we were so big in the British music press and stuff, there's so many elements involved in the split. And that's the main difference, is that I know I really want to do it now. Also, it's a much, much easier situation to be in. Everybody's, we're all kind of at the same period in our lives, and we all get on a lot. Well, I'm having a lot more fun in this group, so that's a big answer.
By the way, some things I'll translate from others.
Yeah, sure.
Just cut out in the interest of time. It all gets translated later.
Of course, yeah. Of course.
全然分かったんで、やっぱスミスが解散した時にね、もうバンドなんか嫌だというふうに思ったはずだと僕は思っているんですが、その中からやっぱりもう一回やろうというふうに決意した最大のその転換のポイントっていうのを教えてほしいです。
you said all of a sudden you sort of found yourself faced with being in a band again and faced with the same obsession as before. But what was the turning point? At what point did you feel like willing to get back into that sort of circumstance again? There must have been some exact.
It was very exact point. It was I was in New York with Matt. As I said, we'd already sort of done some tracks and we talked about the tour. So I was no. I mean, if you want to know the exact point, I was sat in a bar in the Gramercy Park Hotel with Matt, and we were locked in this conversation. And it wasn't a conversation about music, and it was more about our own personal goals and what we set out to do as kids. And I realised that in dealing with Matt, this was really going to work out. Because Matt and I had met in 1982, and without being trying to wax rhapsodic, there was something very, very sort of special there, and some kind of spiritual bond really, and we both felt it. And when we re-met a couple of times, it was sort of at gigs and so on, and we'd just say hello. And then the sort of 2 weeks before that point in New York, we'd been recording, and it was very much about work. And then we kind of relaxed, and we both sort of talked about staying together for a while and doing a tour and possibilities of the group being sort of a real thing. And it was very much a case of, oh God, here I go again. But as I say, it's what I do.
Why were you at the Gramercy Park Hotel?
We were on holiday. We just went off on holiday to New York.
マット以外の誰が声をかけてもおそらくバンド組まなかっただろうなと思います。
You think that you would have been alien to the band format if it hadn't been Matt? You would have been, you never would have gotten back to the band again? Anybody but Matt?
No, because I'll tell you what happened. In 1987 on the Smiths tour, I arranged to meet up with David Palmer because I'd admired him for a long time, and a mutual friend of ours suggested that eventually we should play together. David was really into that, and we met up, and he was unhappy with his situation in the Paul Young group, and I was unhappy with the Smiths, and we said, right, okay, we get out on the other side and form a group. And we met up a couple of times after that. Also, around the time of the last Smiths LP, I went down to see Julian Cope playing in Bristol, because I'd noticed James Eller. He's the only bass player I'd ever been impressed with to work with me. Not plenty of great bass players and so on, but I thought that's the only bass player besides Andy Rourke that I could see myself working with. And again, we had a mutual friend, and he was trying to get us together, so I went down and saw James. And after the Smiths split again, when I was working on a record with Chrissy Hind, I suggested that we get James Eller into play, and so me and James sort of realised this ambition we had to be in a group together. We met within minutes. It felt like we had known each other for ages, and we just said, right, we're going to form a band. He'd also been working with Dave, so we just, three of us found ourselves, right, let's form a group. So Dave and James and myself got together, and we were talking about looking for a singer, and almost within the same week I met James. Matt phoned up and asked me to play on Mindbomb, and he'd asked David, and he'd asked James as well, so the three of us found ourselves behind Matt.
That's really strange. So not only did it have to be Matt, it had to be the other two guys also.
That's right.
That's
Exactly. Again, that's sort of that idea of sort of we having to be obsessed is sort of quite obvious in that kind of situation. Because so we were going to form the group anyway.
もう今の意識としてはやっぱりザザをパーマネントメンバーとして、継続的にずっとやっていこうというそういう意識ですか。
So do you now intend on doing this permanently?
Yes. The only way that it can work is for us to regard it as a long-term, serious situation. And we're all realists, and we know that things can fall apart, or people can change their mind, or whatever. But for the good of the oncoming record, always we have to have a long-term vision. And thankfully, that's the situation as regards Matt as well. He's he's made us feel very, very at home. One thing I'd like to say about the group is I'd realised only in the last few months or so from Matt's point of view is that for it to work there has to be no compromise. That's one of the great things about this group as opposed to all the groups I've seen and been involved in. Is everybody, for it to work right, everybody has to feel absolutely comfortable with their position and with their output and their contribution. No one has to have any frustrations. And Matt's very good. He's very good at man management, and he picked a really good team for him. He wanted someone who was as intense about what he did as intense about what they did as what he did. And that's the way I have to work with lyricists. That's why a couple of times I haven't got on with singers, because I have to be involved with people who are so intense about what they do. And David's a very, very ambitious, talented drummer, and he's taught me a lot about drums. About being expressive in your own right. I always regard drums as just, to be honest. And James just doesn't want to know about anything but playing the bass guitar. So it really does work perfectly, because all of us are really satisfied with our position within the group. None of us want to do anything else.
じゃあ一応確認のためにずっと来てるんですけど、ザ・フェイスのインタビューの中でね、モリシーがもしマーが戻ってきてくれるんだったら、俺はもう今すぐバスに乗ってでも会いに行くって言ってるんだけど、そういうことはありえないですね。
In an interview in the Face magazine, Morrissey was saying, if Johnny would come back, I would get on the first bus and get back together with him.
Yeah.
But obviously that's not possible now because you're very ensconced.
It just honestly just doesn't feel right. It just really doesn't feel right. And I think musically one of the reasons I left was I really felt like we'd come to the end of the road and we'd done as much as we were going to do. And I'm sure I would have been proven right. I'd been carried on, and we would have probably made a really, really bad record, the first and only bad record we made. I really didn't want to be in that position. To be quite honest, I think sort of Morrissey's record proved it. I don't really, and I haven't really been incredibly impressed with what he's done. One or two things I have been. I mean, that's a question I'm asked, but we just grew apart really. We came together. We weren't friends to start with. I approached him to form a group and work. And when that stopped, so did our relationship, because it was built on.
ところでマインドボムはあなたとそれからマット・ジョンソンの共作曲が1曲しかなかったんですけども、これは今後比重が変わっていったりするんでしょうか。ちなみにマットに聞いたら、やっぱり今後バンド的になんかこういう有機的な結合で変えていったりとか、バンド的な色彩をかもしれないと思います。
One of the more surprising elements of Mind Bomb is the fact that there's only one joint effort between you and Matt there among the compositions. When we talked to Matt yesterday, he said obviously in the future the role of the band will be more interlocked with the actual the process. How about from your point of view? How's it going to change?
Well, when we came to do Mind Bomb, most of the songs were written. One thing I should say is that I'll do whatever is necessary for the sake of the record, always will. It's a real joy to be working with another musician who can write music. That's something that I've never been involved with. Was always frustrated by as a kid. I'm sorry. Hello? He's not, mate, no. I don't, mate, no. Oh, it's alright, see you in a bit. So anyway, yeah. One thing I was quite conscious of when we came together is because I'm such a fan of what Matt's done in the past, is not to dilute what he does, and if it works and we enhance things and we make great songs and like Gravitate works out, then that's fine. The point is, if it came to it and Matt was playing a piano tune and he asked me to put guitar down and he'll write a chorus and I really felt like it was complete, or he should do it himself, I'd just say no, just do it yourself. And so the way I feel about it is if it happens, then great. Whatever's good for the record. We quite naturally we've been sort of writing together on tour and sound checks and all that sort of thing. So I think it kind of remains to be seen. But as I said, if if I felt that the group sounded better with Matt being on his own writing the songs, then I'd encourage that.
Actually, come to think of it, I believe he said he was going to wait until the tour ended before he really started any serious
That's right.
songwriting.
Yeah, well, both of us write best when we're in our own. When we look around us and focus on home, really, our home lives. But yeah, it's the first time I've been in a group with anybody where two of us play guitar and I think it just happened automatically. Another thing is I'm conscious of not putting any kind of pressure on the relationship, because it's an obvious thing. I'm a writer, he's a writer, and people want to know whether we're going to write together. We happen to be in the same group, but we'll just have to see, really.
次回作のビジョンというのを今ちょっと話してた。
いいですね。
じゃあ、あとなりのそのジャザのネクストアルバムのビジョンを教えてください。
So I think it's kind of a hard question to answer, but what can we expect from the next album? Is this vision?
What's the vision?
Yeah.
Well, I'd hate to preempt anything, and also at the end of the day, it is Matt Johnson's group. And so I'll be careful about it. But very intense, I think. Very, very intense. And I'm just guessing, but we all really, really like the heavier stuff we do. Good Morning Beautiful is probably our collective favourite song that we've done on the record. So I'd hope that we carry on and be very, very progressive with a capital P, because I do believe that we're one of the only truly progressive groups around. We're progressive in lyrical content and musical content, and as people, our personal philosophies are sort of quite progressive. We're very anti, certainly in as far as the music goes, and we're very anti-music business and traditions and rock and roll, and most of the things that are still around in pop music, really. This sort of constant what's the word? Countdown or inspiration of 60s groups to 70s groups. I've got a really healthy sense of tradition, but personally now I just want to play music that is by a young guy living in 1990 and not half back to what's going on in the past. So we want to be it's going to be very modern, but I'm going to, as always, exploit technology to the fullest. And lyrically, I think it's going to be incredibly interesting, because I do feel like Good Morning Beautiful and Violence of Truth are two of the most important and best lyrics that have been written in pop music, which sounds very grand, but I think if you really investigate those lyrics, then people find that's true. I find that people are always so sort of respecting the whole Jim Morrison old rock and roll ethics. I think these people have got so much respect. Say a character like Jim Morrison, and you put his lyrics next to Matt's, and they're just like drug drivel, and so I think truly, I want us to be truly progressive. Another thing is Jealous of Youth, the new single, which isn't on mine, but I think is a really good indication about the way we work musically. And as a guitar player, it's one of the things I'm most proud of. Probably most proud of since House Image Now.
これは僕が、ジョニーさんに会ったらぜひ聞こうと思ってたずっとしたためた質問なんですけど、あなたはかつてもう一歩でもう本当に世界一のギターヒーローになるところだったところが、今はなんか歌を完璧に支えてやるプレイヤーっていうそういうところに適しているように思えるんですよね。でその点で意識の変革というのが明確にあったんでしょうか、それとも今がたまたまそういう時期なんでしょうか。
示すの時代はもっと違った。
もっと全然ハードな歌を聴いてたし、作曲に関してもすごい自己顕示欲もあったと思うんですね。
This is one question I particularly wanted to ask you about your identity as a guitarist. It seems like in the Smiths your position was a bit more conspicuous, and you tended to play a little more flashy guitar, whereas now you seem to be devoted almost solely to sort of supporting the vocals there, more of a support player. Is this something you've been conscious of? Or?
Yeah, it is. It's something that I really, really welcome. One of the things when I just started off playing, because when I started off playing, I wasn't particularly influenced by guitar players. I was influenced by songs and songwriters and sort of Tamla Motown, and then I got further back into sort of Brill Building and Lieber and Stoller, King, people like that. And when I first started to play guitar, I just wanted to play it virtually like a one-man band. When I played an acoustic guitar, I wanted it to sound like the Temptations. I wanted to hear the bass line and the string parts and all those things. And that kind of developed a style of writing where it was just melodies for days. And the Smiths were a group without keyboards, without two guitars, without backing vocals. And the one source of main musical melody was from my guitar, so I was just going at it constantly. And to be honest, I wanted to be a better player, and I wanted to be able to stretch out, and I wanted to be able to change sounds during the song and be a little bit more dynamic. And I could do those things in the studio with the Smiths by layering things and taking things in and out. But live, as I say, because I was the main source of melody, the first song in the set, I started and I didn't stop strumming until the very last song, the encore. And I just had to make this sort of, as I say, one-man band kind of wash that I'd be able to play with. And I'm very, very pleased with the way I sounded on those records and some of the live gigs. But it did get frustrating as a guitar player because I want to go forward and I want to do new things, and that's why Smith brought in a second guitar player, because I thought it just helped me what I wanted to do as a guitar player. And it was funny actually when Matt and I first came together. He was a real fan of my work in the past, but he almost instinctively, from getting to know me a little, he knew that there was sort of places that I should go really, and he wanted me to sort of lay out a little bit and try and play with new sounds and textures and make a lot of sort of I'm very into sort of feedback at the moment, sort of howling and noises, very very into noises rather than just sort of this one man band thing. So and also I've become very conscious of having done sort of interviews with guitar playing magazines, of the rarity in being a supportive player. There's very, very few people around, and it's just that I grew up with the concept of the song and the overall picture. Not as I always thought guitar players I knew were just like frustrating idiots because they just went out and just wanted to do sort of the ego sort of noise, and it just didn't seem like music to me. I mean, my main principle is I'm an accompanist when I play. I mean, I write, but I'm a musician and I accompany the song and I do whatever's best for the lyrics and the mood and the atmosphere of the song. And to be honest with you, I don't really think that I should take too much credit for it or think that that's a great thing. I just think that it's quite lacking in modern music. With guitar players, guitar playing has just gone that way and just put musical roots gone that way. You see what I mean? And it's just that there are very, very few supportive musician accompanist guitar players around, and that's why it seems quite rare. But to me, it just seems like being a musician.
そうすると例えばその昔からね、なんか俺が前ってしゃしゃり出てってやたら指早く打きゃいいとか、そういうギタリストっていうのは結構こうバカにしてきたものなんですよ。
So you've always kind of looked down on as you were saying, the guitar players who were sort of on an ego trip and try to impress people with technical flash and that.
Yeah, I was probably because I wasn't sort of born in the 50s, because I'm sure that would have been quite an impressive thing during the 60s. I've got a lot of respect for people like Jeff Beck. I think he's taken the Guitar Hero ethic to its final conclusion. I really do. But the world, only has got one Jeff Beck. It doesn't need another one. And I think Jimi Hendrix was probably one of the best musicians in the century, without doubt. And not because of his technique, but because of his soul and fire inside him, really. And plainly, I think I find the traditional image of the Guitar Hero to be very, very outdated and irrelevant in the 1990s. I think by definition it's sexist, homophobic, very, very egotistical. As I said earlier, miles away from the real concepts of a musician, certainly in the pop field. And it's just very, really, really corny. I think guitar players, per se, have become very, very uncool. And if I was a sort of young guy and 14, 15-year-old, I would despair all these spandex cock rockers, really, to be honest. And, I mean, it's very easy to say, you know, they have fight symbol stuff, but the attitude of the guitar players is so gung-ho. So I don't want anything to do with that. And I honestly, I mean, it's quite flattering when I'm sort of included in this sort of list of guitar heroes and quite obviously great musicians at one time, but I don't really want to be the last in a long line of guitar heroes. I just don't. I want to just be like a modern man living in the 1990s, exploiting technology and everything around me for what it's worth. And yeah, I'm not really into that at all. I think the guitar hero syndrome is very, very boring.
だけども、例えばその10代の時にね、マンチェスターのそのコックエアパートから出てきて、スミスをみんな作ってガーッと盛り上がった頃っていうのは、やっぱりそういうふうなこう大人の意識じゃなくてという面はないんですかね。
どういうこと？
だからさ、そのギタリストとしての観点がすごく大人っぽいっていうか、すごく確かなもんだと思う、その歌をサポートして曲全体をちゃんとするっていうことね。だけれどもその10代の頃にマンチェスターのコックエアパートっていうのは、あんまりリッチな人が入ってないところなわけでね、そういうところが出てきた時っていうのはやっぱり俺が前っていうようなそういうギタリズム的な価値観を自分でも身につけていたっていう面はないんですよ。
How about like when you were first starting out with the Smiths? I would imagine at that time, you know, you guys were kind of breaking away from a rather modest lifestyle, and at that time maybe you were a little more willing to be a guitar hero. You were more willing to step into the spotlight there and kind of, you know, flash your.
And to be honest as well, you know, we broke so big so fast that it was quite easy to have your head turned. As I say, you know, what's great is on the record is we wrote some great songs, and that's no one's going to ever be able to take that away from me. But you know, I've learned a few lessons, and one thing that was quite difficult for me because we were so under the microscope in the English press. But any of the groups stubbed their toe at me, copying, you know, it's too much. Was Morrissey's persona was so strong, and we were both partners, that I was almost polarised into this character, and occasionally I slipped into that character. I always was. This has got a cliche, musicians always say this, but you know, I was tagged. I was put in a box of being this almost like bastardisation of Keith Richards, and to be honest, he was my main influence as a person. Not that I was like, you know, sort of drugging out or anything, but his ethics of being in a rock and roll group I found very, very admirable. You know, his respect for a drummer, his very, very traditional attitude of doing anything to make the gig, doing anything for your music, all those things. And I think I was like, to be honest, I think I was guilty of that Keith Richards syndrome. And I was only, you know, when we first started, I was at 18, 19. So I think, you know, that was only kind of natural. But I just became this character in the British music press, and consequently everywhere else for a time. And it was easy for me to slip into it. Also, really, I didn't really, at that time, I didn't want anybody to know what I was really like when I did interviews. And it was very easy to just put on this uniform, really. But having said that, I do think that I was sort of there was a sort of misconception there of me being this sort of stay up all night rock and roll kind of thing. Because as I say, the things that I took from Keith Richards were very, very professional ethics and not his hedonistic ethics. And it was very easy because, you know, Morrissey was this saint-like, clean-living, Oscar Wilde sprouting, bookish character who sculpted quotes and was incredibly fabulous. And I was this scruffy little sort of almost football terrace urchin. And interestingly enough, 5 or 6 years later, if you don't have those qualities, you're completely boring. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, the current trend now is to like smoke pot till it comes out your ears. You know, this whole sort of it's this new sort of scally culture. You know,
I don't follow you there. Is there something in England?
Yeah. I mean, just like the groups that are really good at the moment are very sort of unbookish, very sort of laddish, and suddenly it's become trendy. But you know, the point is, I was sort of portrayed as just being this
Street Urchin.
Yeah, Street Urchin, yeah. I do have a lot of that, but I think there's more to it than that.
ところであなたはねほとんど音楽博士と言ってもいいぐらい非常に音楽の知識が豊富でレコードをすごくいっぱい持ってるっていう話が有名なんですけど一体今どれぐらいレコード所持枚数なんでしょうか。
He's heard that you're quite a music enthusiast and you have a substantial collection of LPs at home.
That's right, yeah.
How many do you have?
Got a few thousand. Yeah, it's just sort of my main passion really, but I found that I'm sort of looking around me for modern music really that inspires me more than I ever did. I kind of just gave up on modern music when I was like 15, 16 because it was punk rock. And to me, we'd only been, say I was like only 13 in 1976, so 14 when punk really started. I was too young to go to a club and spit on a group. And politically I just missed the point because I was just a kid. So all that punk meant to me was bad groups like the Jam and ugly groups like the Clash on top of the pops. When I would start learning to sort of honing down my craft, suddenly I was supposed to be like smashing the guitar up and playing really, really badly. And it was frustrating for me because I was a kid starting to play and I was like, I can play much better than those groups. So I was always a little bit out of time, and that was the final nail in the coffin with modern music for me. And so I started to get really, really even more passionate about Phil Spector, specifically everything Phil Spector did, and a little bit of Elvis Presley, but mostly early Rolling Stones, R&B, John Lee Hooker, Howlin' Wolf, the girl groups, Shangri-Las, the Cookies, and pretty much anything before 1977, and I still do have a passion for those records, but it's almost like sometimes I must be honest, I feel like I know every record that I absolutely love inside out, and that's sometimes a little bit disheartening. But I keep looking, I keep looking for like Slim Harpo records and Otis Russ records, and there's always always someone else to get into. But I think I've devoured and examined every single sort of old pop record that I'm going to like, I think. And in a way that's quite good, because I think what I want to hear now I've got to make myself. It's got to come from out of myself. But yeah, I love records. I buy Jimi Hendrix records all the time, looking for bootlegs and stuff like that. I love records.
それでやっぱりあなたほどの知識と技量があるとね例えばニューダのピーター・フックみたいにストーンローゼズとバンド見つけてきてプロデュースするとかそういうふうには興味がいっぱいしないんですよ。
With your degree of knowledge and ability, it seems like you would sort of follow the same path as the guy in New Order, Peter Hook.
Peter Hook?
Yeah, who went out and found like the Stone Roses and produced them. I get the feeling that a person with your sensibilities would be doing the same thing, but not too distant future.
Well, that's something that I consider for the future. Yeah, certainly. But to be honest, I'm too busy making records with Bernard from New Order. That's why Hook is producing groups. And I'm too busy making and writing songs, I know Hooky does quite well at that. He runs a studio and stuff. But when I wake up, I every day I worry about where the next song is going to come from. And I don't think Hooky does.
Yeah, big difference there.
Every day it's always been like that for me. And it might not come that day, and it might not come that week, but it'll come back on the 8th day because I just don't get myself so worked up after that or something.
次の音楽はね
いや、次がまだね、作曲をしたいっていう願望があまりにも強いから、他のねプロジェクトを考える精神的な余裕はないと。
現役だとバリバリ。
そうそう、バリバリ現役だから。
ところでマンチェスターのシーンというのは今非常に盛り上がってると言われてて、今挙げたストーンローゼズとかね、ハッピーマンデルとか、インスパイラルカーペンツとか、非常に優秀なバンドがビンビン出てきてるんだけども、やっぱ同じマンチェスターに住む人として、そういう人とよくやってもワクワクします。
I think your reaction sort of answered the question there, but he said with the scene in Manchester is so buoyant at the moment with the Stone Roses and all the other bands, he mentioned that it must excite you as a denizen of that fine saying.
Well, one thing that's happened is the rest of the country. I mean, this is very obvious, but the rest of the country, and consequently the rest of England, Japan, America, Japan as well, has just caught onto this feeling that's been happening in Manchester for about 3 years, and because it's become a scene, everybody in Manchester is really embarrassed by it now. Really, that's true. And it's because you just got journalists coming up from London all the time interviewing all these bands, and everyone's getting really, really tired of it because it's just very obvious something becomes fashionable, it automatically becomes unfashionable when people create it. It's just fads out. As Matt says, fashion doesn't age well, and it's starting to affect people in Manchester. But the thing is, from the Buzzcocks to Happy Mondays, you've got 11 years, possibly 12 years, because Happy Mondays is still hot, of massive influence on the music scene. You've got Buzzcocks, you've got a monochrome set, a certain ratio, but the main real big influential groups were Buzzcocks, New Order, Joy Division. If it wasn't for Joy Division, there wouldn't be any U2. So they've got a lot to answer for there, but there wouldn't be any U2, there wouldn't be any Echo and the Bunnymen, there certainly wouldn't be any Cure. I mean, I really do believe that New Order, Joy Division were probably the most influential group.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah.
First time I heard that.
Oh yeah, I think Bernard Sumner, this always messes up guitar aficionados, but I think Bernard Sumner is one of the most influential guitar players, stroke musicians of the 80s as well. And he quote, can't play. I mean, technically he's not very good, but the Cure, all those sort of poignant piano melodies, guitar melodies played on one string, they wouldn't exist really if it wasn't for Joy Division was so influential. Smiths, The Fall were a very influential group. Happy Mondays, 808 State, and anyway, point is that they've been so influential with the groups in Manchester, and yet if you take something like the Merseybeat scene in the 60s, which was obviously far more sociologically influential because the times were just so naive then, and pop music was relatively new. But that period only lasted from 1963 to 1966, really, 66. And then you had the overlap from like 65 to 68 of Carnaby Street and that influence with groups like the Small Faces. Obviously the Rolling Stones came really into their own there, and the emphasis moved down south a little bit. The Kinks, but again, and that period was incredibly influential because that influenced groups like the Byrds, who sent it back over to England. And all this whole set of groups that was spawned from really the blueprint of the Rolling Stones in 1965, groups like Iggy and the Stooges, Mitch Ryder and the Detroit Wheels, MC5, all those groups went on to inspire another generation. But that was a very short period. Again, that was from 64, 65 to 68. Then when the kind of blues boom was influential, and you had John Mayall finally coming into his own, and see groups like Chicken Shack and Fleetwood Mac. That period was from say 68 to 71, and groups like Family, Traffic, all that. So all these really, really influential periods only lasted very, very short periods of time. And I think time will show that the Manchester period, which lasted 11 years and is still going strong, is like no other period. So that's what I feel very proud of. And everyone's incredibly conscious at the moment of accepting and enhancing this new fad. One thing, the Smiths, when we first started, automatically we were asked, are you part of this Manchester band scene? And that was in 1982. And we said no, because we really didn't feel we were. And we were, but as a group of people, we were always outsiders. But also because we knew that was going to be a very restrictive thing, and we wanted to go outside of that. And that's why Stone Roses and Happy Mondays are also saying the same thing. They're very smart, they're saying no, because they don't really just be pigeonholed in this scene that's going to suddenly switch off. But it's been so polarised, this scene, and it's been so overexposed now. And as always, by London journalists, they always come and kill every provincial scene. They did with the postcard scene in the early 80s. Because they don't have a scene, they want to just explain everything and make it something that people can read about and digest and understand in one article, and that kills it. And it's always in a magazine like The Face, the hard times, the last sort of movement of any sort of interest that was happening in London was like just around the clash with the last great gang in town from London, and I'm on a roll over, so and that's just about 10 more minutes, 15 minutes. No.
No, next slide.
But I forgot what the fuck I was saying.
The various scenes were killed by the London Journal.
Yeah. I mean, in the last, the last thing that came out of London was sort of in the late 70s, early 80s, and it was the Clash, something I didn't really care for too much. But there was a sort of vaguely interesting scene around Clubland that was killed in one article by this guy called Robert Elms in the Facebook. It was a Hard Times article, and it was a really, really exciting time. And because it was written down, it just suddenly became more fashionable, and everybody just disowned it. So, as Matt said, fashion doesn't age well, and if you're involved in it, you better watch out.
こういう見方は間違いでしょうか。あなたはその自分がね、強力にそのマンチェスターをルーツにして持ってるんだって自覚したときに初めて自分の本来的な資質を自覚できた。だから今までそのポップスターのライブの中で自分はどういうポジションにいるのか、いろいろ模索もあっただろうし、いろいろあったけれども、最近のこの落ち着いたゆったりした感じっていうのは自分がマンチェスター人なんだと気がついたところから始まっているというふうに言えるかという。
Kind of a difficult question, but do you think that coming to grips with your identity as a person who was brought up in Manchester, do you think coming to grips with that has sort of changed you, made you accept what you are, and kind of like settle back into a style that's maybe more natural to you?
Well, I don't know about the style. I don't know. The last bit kind of relates. I mean, the thing is that coming from Manchester to I'm talking about being a musician or just as a person, it is a very strong identity because there are very, very strong personality traits in that city, as is the case in nearly all the provinces in India. Because of the things that have been talked about before, things like unemployment, the climate for a start. London, but it's a cosmopolitan capital city. It's filled with displaced people from all over the place, and most of the people who live in the city, they've got to be wealthy to live in the city. They're involved in the film business or music business or whatever, and they're less innovative. They're not very innovative and creative people. There's a sort of, well, not cynicism, but there's a real scepticism which is far healthier that runs through the people of Manchester and Liverpool and Glasgow. So that does kind of forge a very, very strong personality trait that runs through a lot of people.
I think what he's trying to get at was, in the beginning you said you sort of disavowed yourselves from the so-called scene there in Manchester. But it wasn't a matter of denying, your roots or anything.
No, right. No. It was, to be honest, it was a matter of being one step ahead of the game. Yeah, because, we just didn't want to be, right, it would have been too easy if we would have said, yeah, we're part of this sort of Manchester scene. We had to disown it for people to see that there was more than one dimension to it. When people, that was before people actually heard much of the music. But people were always looking for an angle. When we first started, they didn't understand us. And we had very quote miserable lyrics and a very sort of miserable message. So it was quite understandable that we were kind of invited this northern post-industrial gloom and doom aesthetic. And we were very close to that, but we did whatever we could to sort of, to bring the other dimensions of the group. And we weren't very worldly people, and there was only really Mike, the drummer, he wanted to travel, but Morrissey wasn't very into traveling, into being big in England, and we were fairly big in England. We didn't have any aspirations to be one sort of massive. So. Yeah, I suppose it did sort of have a strong bearing on our identity, yeah. But right now, I don't really feel like I'm not part of the Manchester scene. I can't be because of the group I'm involved with. I'm the closest friends, really, with the exception of, say, Burns from New Order. London musicians. Like that.
今の質問はね、ちょっと的を外れてるっていうかね、もう別にだから
ちょっとね、分かるんだどういうこと。エレクトロニックって バンドっていうかプロジェクトがあって、これは知らないと思うんだけど、バーナー・サムラーとニューダムね、それからペッション・ボーイズのニール・テナントと一緒にやったプロジェクトなのよ。でこれを最初にやるって聞いた時俺すごく不思議だったのはさ、スミスの時に最も毛嫌いしていたエレクトロニクスサウンドの代表選手なわけね。でやっぱりジョニー・マー本人としてはそういうなんかエレクトロニクスを使ってるのは良くないとか、そういう建前とは全然なかったんでしょうか。
He found it quite odd that you were involved in that project with Bernard Sumner and Neil Tennant Electronic, because when you were in the Smiths, you seemed to very vocally denounce electronic music.
Yeah,
Was
well,
there a conflict there?
no, thankfully, you know, I sort of broadened my horizons a little bit, and I did sort of start to change my mind. I just changed my mind. The thing is, one thing about the Smiths is that we had very, very strongly defined politics and a very, very strong manifesto. And when we first formed, there was a very, very strong emphasis on duos. Tears for Fears had just started. There was like orchestral manoeuvres in the dark. New Order was starting to become a real true electro band, and I found very, very little substance in that. And there was nothing about it. To be completely honest, the only sort of electronic music that I really, really liked was Soul Mine and first Suicide LP, and bits and pieces of Kraftwerk. But what we were kicking against were the orchestral manoeuvres in the darks and the Tears for Fears. They used technology in a very, very sort of superficial way. And what happened with electronic is quite a sort of unspectacular story, really. This was about 18 months ago. Bernard came to see me and he said that he wanted to do a solo record for a number of reasons. And once he told me his reasons, I thought it was a very, very natural thing to get involved. The main reasons were, you know, he wanted to be able to make records without all the fuss of having to promote it, having to say, yeah, this is my new product. Again, he's a fan of music, and Bernard's an interesting character. He doesn't really sit very comfortably in the position of a pop star. He doesn't like the adulation, he's bored silly of that, and he doesn't like all the fuss. He wants to just put out songs, and that was something I could really, really relate to. So he said that, you know, well, we both like, you know, this kind of music and that kind of music and that. And we both want to make records where we can just put it out without all this massive fuss. I mean, as it turned out, the record's been really successful without all this fuss. But and what happened was, I mean, firstly, Bernard and his girlfriend and myself and my wife Angie go on holiday together and hang out together and go to clubs together, and we're friends first, and we were just in two different groups. And the way we've made the record is, because we do see a lot of each other, we go out, maybe go out for a meal, or mostly we go to clubs and have a good old party, you know, good time, and then we go back to my place and we go in this bedroom, which is like maybe twice the size of this room, and we just make a record. It's got a desk in there, it's got a tape machine, and on the other side of the wall is my bed, and then it's very unspectacular, and on paper it seems like a conceptual supergroup. But it isn't. It's two friends who got really bored of all the fuss. I mean, it's only now that we've got a record company in America to put it out. It's been a hit in England for ages. We can't be bothered, you know, and we're really not bothered about it. If we had our way, it'd come out, you know, in a limited edition with nothing on the label, just for DJs, you know. And another thing that was really exciting for me about electronic was, and is that I'm a real fan of disco music. Not say modern dance music from the 80s. I like Fat Fat Band and Ohio Players and Parliament and Funkadelic. And I've always liked New Order. And the thing certainly about the song Getting Away With It, is that I wanted to do a song that was like Sister Sledge. I mean, like 70s, well-crafted pop song. Like Sister Sledge with New Order as the backing group. And one thing while I think of it, that is very attractive to me as far as technology goes and electro, is the very fact that I denounced it so heavily in the Smiths, and that, you know, I was pigeonholed and expected to toe the line. And when I left the Smiths, you know, I got so much stick. I was public enemy number one. That, to be honest, I did everything I could to alienate those people who felt disappointed by me. Because I think, I felt pretty let down by it. I don't want to sound bitter because I'm really not bitter, but I felt really, really let down by the attitude of the press that had championed us and a lot of the fans. And I was determined to make my stamp as my own man, and that's another reason why I embraced electro. And also there's another reason, as a guitar player, I find it really, really challenging to put guitar parts over machines, because it hasn't been done properly before. It never has been done, and I'm learning like all kinds of new things. And Bernard Sumner, he wrote the book on electronic music. He's responsible for the Pet Shop Boys, and he's responsible for this sort of Euro disco happening in America. I mean, why I say the Pet Shop Boys, there's a lot of groups that you were a spin-offs of the Pet Shop Boys, but Pet Shop Boys were ultimately influenced by New Order sound. And I found that really, really, as I say, challenging, as I say, to lay guitars on machines, and if I'm going to do it, I'm going to do it with a guy who wrote the book, and I've learned a lot about that kind of thing. And also, as you get younger, you become, my feelings, I'm sort of qualifying what I said earlier, and there isn't any conflict, because, my feelings were, you're young, and my feelings were almost dogmatic. Smiths were, we did have our manifesto did become a dogma towards the end, and very, very restrictive, and we ended up going down this cul-de-sac, and we come to the end of it, and what we've done is we created so many rules and things that we were against, that we could never use sequences. There was one instrumental track, the Dre's train, and Morrissey couldn't sing on and wouldn't sing on because I insisted it had a Morse code sequence run. He just wouldn't, because politically and ethically he was against it. But that was just before the end of the Smiths. And so if people think about that track, the Dre's train, it's not such a great surprise that I started to move towards electronic music. And some of the fans' reaction to that track, because it had a sequencer on, was so stupid that really ignited this sort of contrary trait in my personality.
Very English, very English.
Yeah, very, very English, yeah.
Although it does harken back to a time when Bob Dylan first used electric guitar.
That's right. That's right.
But it's never been the same in America since then. We've never had a backlash of that. Well, there was a disco sex period, but very rarely do you have that sort of dogmatic backlash. But in your case, I think it's very interesting.
Yeah, I agree, yeah.
一回限りのバンドだって感じしてた今。
っていうよりはその友達が2人で気軽に暇の時にレコードを作ったっていう感じで、
まあ継続的なもんでもない。
でもない
ないだろうね。全然話題変わるんですけど、ワールドツアーっていうのはジョニー・マーにとって多分初めてだと思うんですね。アメリカとか行ってるけど森氏がすごく外出るの嫌いだったもんだから、なんかすごく妙な感じがしないですか、今だって初めてワールドツアーやったっていうのは。
Since Morrissey didn't like to travel and stuff, I guess when you're with the Smiths, you were rather limited in terms of where you actually toured. Although you did play America, he says it must seem rather odd for you to be such a successful musician, and yet it's taking so long to do a world tour.
Yeah.
It seems strange to you.
Yeah, it does, because I really never thought I'd do it, because it seemed like the groups who did world tours, had to be incredibly well organised, and the Smiths were shambolic. That was because I was managing them. I should know I was the manager, and that's not entirely true. It's 50% true. Morrissey and myself managed the group, but that was incredible. That was one of the really, really difficult things, and it's doing a world tour. It can either be the way I've seen it. It can either be incredibly impersonal, because by the very nature of doing a world tour, you have to have some kind of market and be quite big. I always imagine those groups are really, really huge, or it has to be, as it is with the incredibly personal and intense, like a family. Like it's as simple as that. Your families, you're sitting at the breakfast table and your little brother comes down and he's got a problem. You know about that problem. There's no way he's going to hide it, and that's the way it is, unfortunately, on tour. You can't, in a setup like ours, you can't sort of keep everything to yourself. You have to be completely open, and I hope that you're in the right group of people, and thankfully everybody is. Everybody's really open with their sort of personal life, and their personal feelings. And thankfully, everybody else is very understanding and very supportive, or give you a kick up the butt when you're just being out of order. And that's one of the joys of being with a bunch of great friends. You know, we're incredibly fortunate, and especially because of my experiences with the Smiths, I just don't take any of this for granted. And yeah, I learn something new every day, and it's a really great situation. I mean, we've only got tomorrow night's gig, and then we've got Paris, and I'm like, I'm not looking forward to going back. You know, I really like being on tour, and that's a real new for me. And I'm really glad that I've done it, and we're really looking forward to doing an even longer, more extensive world tour after the next record, or the next 2 records. Well, the Smiths just couldn't have lasted any more. The longest we ever did was like 6 or 7 weeks, which was really long for us in Latin America, and almost split us up at the time. So yeah, it's great, absolutely perfect.
日本でね、マット・ジョンソンよりもやっぱりジョニー・マーの方が知名度があった感じで、ジョニー・マーの方にやっぱり俺が見た限り他の国はどうか知らないけども声援が多かったりする、環境があるわけですよ。そうするとなんかひょっとしてジョニー・マーはなんか申し訳ないような気になってんじゃないかなと思うんですけど、どうでしょうか。
In Japan, he's not sure what the situation is in other countries, but at least having seen the show here, it seems like the fans are much more familiar with you than they are with Matt. So he got the feeling the concert he was sort of drawing more cheers and whatnot. Did you notice that? And if you did you feel uncomfortable with any of it?
No, I didn't notice it tonight. No, I haven't noticed it in Japan. No, I mean, no, not really. It was a bit weird when in Manchester, which is only to be expected, and I did feel uncomfortable with it. Yeah, but to be honest with you, I don't really think it's as obvious as it can actually, to be honest. I don't really see that as a big deal, And without embarrassing Matt, I like being in somebody's group, and I just feel like I'm in Matt's group, and I'm looking at him, and every night I'm like listening to the lyrics like I did when I very first heard the record. I don't know whether this is actually relevant, but I'm a big fan. I'm Matt's fan, and one of the great things actually about me working with I think for Matt is that quite often when in some situations off stage, I remember what it's like to be Matt Johnson's fan, and that hasn't changed for me at all.
It's amazing after a greater part of a world tour you still feel that way.
Oh yeah, and that's really important to me that I keep that perspective. I remember, it doesn't seem like long ago when Infected came out and when Soul Money came out. When I first met Matt, he was just about to start writing Soul Money, and as I say, we clicked very strongly right away, and I followed his career and his interviews and all his moves so closely, A as a fan, B as a friend, and I've still got that perspective. And to be honest, when Matt asks me something or something happens and the answer doesn't come naturally to me, I just remember what it was like when I was listening to his records. I mean, another thing that I should say is that when I told Matt when we first started working together was there was a time on the Smiths tour, Smiths American tour. As I say, I knew that I was going to be in a group with David Palmer by this time. That I was listening to Angels of Deception, and I listened to it about 4 or 5 times, and I knew that when the very first time that song was ever going to be played live, it was going to be playing. I just had no doubt about it. I just had this very strong picture about the whole breakdown bit where I play on the organ and the drums come in. And I told Matt this, and the first time we ever played it, he looked around to me and gave me the biggest grin I've ever seen him do. But that's entirely true, And another thing about Matt was that his lyrics were always, they said so much to me when the records came out. As a young guy, whereas Morrissey's didn't. Now the thing is, all the time I was working with Morrissey, I was so proud of him, and I think he is undoubtedly one of the best lyricists of all time in pop music, because there's no one that exercises his wit and his particularly quirky insight, and he's incredibly unique character and able to express all these unique ideas in such a fantastic way that no one can come near him to a point. But I could always relate personally, because of my life being different to Morris's, to Matt's lyrics more than anybody else's. Now that's just something I'm saying with hindsight. I mean, because Morris's lyrics were very sort of sexual, and his sexual politics and my sexual politics differ massively, and mine and Matt's don't. Also, another thing was that Matt and I have gone through a very, very similar parallel phases in our lives, where we've been looking for things that aren't there, and we've been like getting really, really wasted, and we both went through sort of drug use of various kinds and sort of spiritual kind of searching, and so all the time, his documentation of his life I found incredibly interesting, and as I say, I could relate to it, and that's something that I don't take for granted. I mean, to be in a group with this person is really, really important to me, and it's something that I know that when I get older I'm going to be incredibly grateful to have been in this position, because of what she said. No one else could touch him as far as me being able to relate to him. With Smith didn't say many things about politics of England, the English government, and I'm getting less and less interested in politics, but at the time it was like perfect. When Heartland came out, I was like, why can't we do something like this? Oh my God! And Matt did the Red Wedge, and I did the Red Wedge. So politically, spiritually, sexually, personally, we relate totally. And it was almost like that was one of the things we were talking about at that time. To answer the question before, when he asked me about when it actually clicked with Matt, it was this sort of, he realised that we were just like totally in sync. I'm sure if you ask him, he'll say the same thing. We're quite alike in a lot of ways, very, very similar in a lot of other ways, but we're really, really passionate people, and always looking for something other than what is in front of our eyes, really. And sometimes that is dangerous, and a lot of the times it leads to a really, really great record. A few sleepless nights, but a great record.
じゃあ一つ言ってたらちょっと後ろ押すんだけど、あなた心の底からこいつと一緒にやりたいと思ったところの2人、モンジとマトリモスの共通項といったらどういうことですか？
It seems like your collaborations with both Morrissey and Matt, as we kind of beat a dead horse here, but it's a real heartfelt thing. They're two different experiences, but there must be some points in common. Reasons why you had such a gut feeling about working with these two guys.
Yeah.
What are the points in common?
Intensity is the main thing. One thing which people will probably be surprised at is that Brian Ferry has got a really, really similar intensity. His records end up sounding a little bit airbrushed, but I've got a lot of respect for Brian. He's a person who's, let's say, he isn't filled with self-love, put it that way. He's very, very self-critical, and sometimes to us there's a difference between, say, him and Matt, because Matt knows when it's time to stop and he's really on the right track. But the connection between Matt and Morrissey is intensity, and that's why I'm very, very comfortable about my role as a guitar player, because I'm an intense guitar player. If I'm sort of quite an intense person, I know that, and guitar playing can be a very, very simple thing. You just can, and sometimes that's very easy for me, and I'm glad I'm not Matt. And see, I can focus all my intensity into a piece of wood with 6 strings on it, and Matt takes it in everywhere, and I have to sort of try and get it down in words and music and video form, and that's like really, really hard. But one thing about Morrissey and Matt is Morrissey writes songs for and about himself against the rest of the world. Matt Johnson writes songs for and about himself and the rest of the world. And thankfully I'm in the rest of the world
Thank you very much.
Hey, thanks. I mean,
Thanks a lot.
I really enjoyed it. I really didn't have my teeth in at first because I'm not used to it, but sort of got more into it. So there's probably loads of stuttering and stuff in there. at the start. Yeah, at the start I was didn't quite had a bit nervous, but no, good. Enjoyed it. Yeah.
That was good. You should have seen Matt go on there. When he goes off on a tangent, boy, that guy's out in the ozone.
He's brilliant, isn't he? He's brilliant. I love it. The two. Imagine what the two of us like together.
Yeah, I can somehow imagine like long sleepless nights.
Yeah.
Lots of conversation.
Yeah. But he's amazing. He gets onto the stream of consciousness, which it's always focused and it always comes out with the same stuff, but just different ways of expressing it. It's more and more and more focused.
Yeah.
He's really quite interesting.
Well, I think the interesting thing about him is that when he talks, he expresses ideas that obviously he's thought a lot about.
That's right.
He's not just pontificating, ad-libbing there.
That's
It's obvious stuff.
that's
It's a lot of stuff that's been stewing around the mind there for quite a while.
Yeah.
So it does come out that way. I just think that he should be a little more focused sometimes. Yeah.
Yeah.
He was really going off in all directions there.
But the thing is actually that what he could do was if he wanted to, he could be like very focused. But it's almost like he's such a fantastic guy. He'll let somebody be privy to what's going on.
Yeah.
Because he knows that he can just go question, answer, and maybe you'll be sort of satisfied. But he's too kind of open, too honest, and too candid. Yeah, and he doesn't play any kind of games. That's what I really like about him. That's what we're doing. So what we do is we don't play games. We just hope it works.
Yeah.
Morrison's very, very sort of calculating person, not necessarily in a negative way. But I love that about him. You just what you see is what there is really, and what you wear is what there is. You just play any kind of game. Fantastic.
Yeah.
Pretty fearless guy,
Impressive.
He's my hero. That's great. That's what I mean about actually obsessed. You haven't heard me talk about David Palmer yet, that's a whole thing in itself,
That's another interview.
Yeah,
That's next time you come here, we'll talk about it.
Next year. So, I'll enjoy talking to you. Good luck with it anyway. Hope it's okay.
Thanks a lot.
Yeah, thanks a lot.
Take care.
See you later.
Yeah, see you later.
Nice.
I'll see you in the watch.
Okay. Yeah, good one.
Bye bye.